All right. Well, let's get going. Today we have Susan Dreydoppel, who's for 18 years has been the executive director of the Moravian Historical Society in Nazareth. And she has been doing historical work for more than 30 years. She's very intimately acquainted with the village at Schoeneck, and she's very familiar with the Clewell history and all that kind of information. I've asked Sue if she would share, if she knew to share just a little bit more about the Clewells and the Moravian connection. A couple of weeks ago, her daughter, Sarah, shared with us about Moravians and their culture and their traditions. But now I've asked Sue to get a little bit more in detail about our Clewell family and the Moravian Church. So Sue, if you kindly take it away. Sue, were you able to hear me? Hello?
Yeah, you're breaking up again, and it's my internet. So yeah, this is just not good. Okay, I can only see, well, first of all, I feel like I'm preaching to the choir because Richard and Joanne and Conrad and John, all of you know more about the Clewell family than I do. So this is kind of weird to be giving a presentation to you. If you have any questions, just yell out and we'll, about anything that I'm showing, just yell out, or at the end there will be time for more questions too. Let's see, so I guess I'm not frozen. All right, so let's go. Start with a little bit of history just to put it in context. The whole European history thing, we'll talk a little bit about that at the end, but mostly it doesn't matter because that's not where the Clewells and the Moravians intersect. So we'll start with arriving in Philadelphia from Europe, 1737. Both Clewells, both families, the Clewells and the Kuchlis, arrive on separate ships, but only a couple days apart. They all go to Ole, Pennsylvania, a little west of here, except for George, who stays in Philadelphia. This is probably not news to any of you. Now, the Moravians didn't arrive in Pennsylvania until a couple of years. They arrived on the Nazareth tract. Now, you're covering up some of my letters. Can you all see, can you see the word Whitfield, George Whitfield? You're all frozen. I'll wait. There you go.
Yeah, we got it. Yeah, you're good.
You got it, okay. So they arrive on the Nazareth tract, just a couple of blocks from where Sarah and I are right now. In 1740, they did not own the land yet. They had been hired by George Whitfield. He was an English evangelist who had bought 5,000 acres here, and he wanted to start a school. So he hired some of the Moravians to come up, look, and they began to construct the first buildings in Nazareth. What they called the first house was a residential house that no longer exists. The Gray Cottage and the Whitfield House do still exist here in Nazareth. They came from the Savannah colony. That was a British colony in Georgia. The Moravians arrived there in 1735. Richard, your timeline that you showed me is a little off on the Moravians coming to this country, but we can fix that later. The Georgia colony didn't work out. The Moravians kind of abandoned that work and decided to come up to Pennsylvania instead. So they got here. 2 years later, the Moravians reached out a little bit and they went to Ole, where the Clewells were, and they started preaching there. They were preaching to the German-speaking people of varying denominations. There were very few preachers in this country, German-speaking preachers in this country at the time. And so rather than going only to Moravians, because there were only a handful of them too, They just went and preached, and anybody who wanted to come and listen was welcome to do that. Ole was significant for Moravians. It was the site of one of the Pennsylvania synods. Pennsylvania synods were 7 meetings in various locations. One of them was in Ole, where the leader of the Moravians, Count Zinzendorf, was trying to make sure that everybody who needed to be preached to could do that, even though there weren't very many ministers yet on this side of the Atlantic. And so he was trying to get them all together to work out an idea of cooperation. Eventually, it didn't get very far because it was just way ahead of its time. Now, we have what are called full communion agreements, the Moravians, the Lutherans, the Episcopalians. There are other agreements with other denominations, but this is only in the last maybe 20 years, 25 years. And in 1742, it was not yet a thing. So we have the Moravians being in Ole, and at least Franz being there. So Franz writes that he was aware of the Moravians when he was in Ole, and he recognized that their teachings were consistent with his father's. In his autobiography that we were talking about earlier, he said that his father had tried to teach him religion and give him some guidelines, and he recognized that the Moravians were consistent with that. So for a question, did the ecumenism of the Moravians lead to their request once they got to Bushkill Township, lead to their request to the Moravians for a pastor? I don't know, but it's quite possible just from the various locations of people at the time. So the Clewells leave Ole for Nazareth, the Nazareth area, in 1745. By this time, both they're married. Franz and Salome purchased land 1.5 miles north of the Nazareth settlement. George and Anna Maria purchased land 4 miles northwest of Nazareth, and the parents, the mother and the father, purchased land kind of between the others. So they're up there, and Nazareth is a little bit south. So this is just speculation. Richard had asked if I knew why they would leave Ole and come to Nazareth. Just my guess. The Clewells had gone to Ole with a colony of settlers, and they were all living kind of in the same area. So it may be that there just wasn't enough land available in the Ole area for them either to purchase their own land or for them to purchase as much land as they wanted in that area. They did eventually purchase quite a few acres in this area. So maybe the reason that they had to leave Ole was just that they wanted to purchase their own land. I don't know about that. You all might have, found some research about this, but this is just my speculation. Now, the famous paragraph from the Clewell history, the first volume, page 30. Weller sent a petition. It was signed by, you've probably all read this, I am assuming. The citation for this, well, there is no citation for it, but we're guessing that it's from a handwritten history that in the first Schoeneck register, which is in the archives, the Moravian archives in Bethlehem. It's handwritten, and it's in the front of that, the report of the first beginning and remarkable something. Your pictures are in the way of the congregation at Schoeneck. So my guess is that the first Clewells read that, used that as the citation for the Clewell history. In 1755, the Clewells were recognizing the need for someone to preach to them. They wanted someone to preach to them in German. And they actually would be able to come. And the Lutherans said, we don't have anybody to send to you. Muhlenberg, whose name is famous now, was not yet in the country, and they just didn't have anybody who could be freed up to come to them. So eventually they asked the Moravians, and they sent a letter. So this is the actual letter. If you're trying to read it, you probably can't. The German handwriting was different. It is possible to learn to read it, but you pretty much have to take a class, and it's very difficult. But this is the actual letter and the translation of it on the right. And the part that you are going to be interested in is the signatures. So here is from the person who translated it. Said, you know, it was very primitive. It's German script written in the dialect that they spoke at the time. So if you go through, you can see Peter Stout. This is his signature. If you can see my cursor. Most of them just had to make an X. So I mean, he couldn't even make an X, but that's kind of his mark there. Casper der Walt is here. I think I'm freezing up, but here's his X. George Clewell is here. Either George or Franz wrote it. Where'd my cursor go? Here's Franz. They actually could sign it. Walter Miller is here. He made a little sign here. And Hannes, short for Johannes Kukli, their father-in-law, made his X here. Now I'm just checking. Okay, you're all there. So I'm not frozen up. Now, if you remember from the Clewell history, the letter was signed by, there's 6 names on the letter. And John Peter Stout is here. John Kukli is here. But Henry Kostenbader, there is no Kostenbader here. Walter Mueller is Walter Miller. He had anglicized his name when he signed it. And this poor Mr. Bliley, whose name first. So this is the difference between primary history and paying too much to what's called secondary history. Primary history is the actual letter. And secondary history is like looking in one of the Clewell books, you know, something that they did some research and wrote. So, you know, the history that was used to document it, that handwritten history was written in 1785. Now it was 30 years after the original letter had been written. Obviously, it was written from memory. They didn't have access to the first letter, I'm sure. So it gets the date wrong. It says it was in 1754, and it was actually 1755. Although this could be, at that point, they were changing calendars. And I don't know exactly when that started and stopped, but there was, between old calendar and new calendar, some was used in Europe longer than here. There's about a 10-day difference, so that could explain that. But then there's the list of signers that they also got wrong. So you just need to kind of know that as you're looking at some of your history here. But despite that, the important thing is that the letter was answered, and probably because they had this settlement already just a couple miles to the south, and they did have someone who could reach there. So in February 1755, Brother Franz Christian Lemke from Nazareth went to Franz Clewell's house in Bushkill Township, a couple miles away, and preached to anybody who wanted to come, the families, their neighbors. A couple months after that, Franz and George wrote another. One of the things that came out of the Pennsylvania synods, trying to get all of the German-speaking Protestants to cooperate, one of the reasons it eventually failed is that everybody else thought that the idea of this was to turn everybody else into Moravians. And there were all kinds of things, letters in the newspaper and newspaper editorials about this. It probably was not correct, but they had apparently heard this. And so now let me see if I can, there we go. So I could read this. Mostly what it says is, we understand, the pastor had said to them, we're not trying to make you Moravians. And so they're writing back to this. But what you might need to know for your family research is that here they say themselves, George is Lutheran, Franz is Reformed. It's very interesting. The two brothers are differing, opposing religions, and both wives are Lutheran. But they're saying it's okay. We will. I'm trying to put your pictures back, and I can't do that. Anyway, so what they say is it's okay. We will still do this. We will still have you come and preach to us. And what they also say is, not only that, we would like you to baptize our children. So again, this is primary research. So Franz's oldest child, here you have them saying, was born July 22nd, 1754. George's was there. So you have verification of the dates from wherever else you find them. And in fact, in Easter of 1755, a different Moravian pastor came and baptized Franz Clewell and Johannes Clewell during worship at Franz's house. Now let me see if I can, there we go, get you back. Okay, so worship continued at Franz. It was apparently getting too small. And so the meeting place was moved to the home of someone who I believe became Clewell in-laws. And it was moved also a little closer to Nazareth. So it might have helped out the pastor. But it went a log cabin, which is no longer there, across the road from the present location of the Schoeneck Moravian Church. Now, the Clewells, I mean, once that started, the Clewells were active in the congregation up until the present day. But for those who don't know the various Schoeneck churches, I will just show you a couple pictures. The first one was built on the same property where the church is now, actually where the parsonage is, in 1762. The building was consecrated October 3rd. And at the same service, Christina Clewell, a daughter of Franz and Salome, was baptized at the same service. After a couple of decades, that church got too small, so they built another one. So the church that they built is actually this one on the right. This one was built of stone, and eventually they took down the log church, which had been here, and built a stone school building, which is now the parsonage. So if you go to the church now, this is the parsonage, and the present church is on this location. This is the present church, built in 1889. Doesn't look quite like that anymore, but it has in the past. This is the church in 2012 after 3 additions. Now the sign is different. We now have a digital sign out front. But this is you can see the original steeple, the original blue. It has come out. And let's see, from the beginning, as I said, the Clewell descendants have been active in the congregation. There have been several major donations that the family has made. In 1890, there was a new bell donated. In 19 was in the front of the church, were donated by the Clewell family reunion in memory of Louisa and in memory of Franz and George. And there have been other things donated over the years. but I just put these down. And as I said, Clewell reunions were first held in 1903 at the church. And throughout the 20th century, it was pretty much an annual thing. I know that a lot of people on this call have probably been at lots and lots and lots of them. It was usually in August. They would kind of take over the church for a Sunday. There was a worship service, there was a luncheon, there was a business meeting. I was at a couple of them, but you all know what those were like. And then they started having them in other locations, and I don't know, I think now you're trying to get some together occasionally. But this used to be an annual thing. I put this in, as what I said about the Clewells were still very heavily involved in the church. I believe that all 4 of these are Clewell descendants. Some of you can tell me if I'm wrong. I know that some of you on this call can pick out at least 2 of them. But I think they're all 4 Clewells. Conrad, John, is that right?
This is Richard, and everybody else is muted right now. But to the best of my knowledge, Vernon Messinger is not a Clewell, but Mildred Miller and Janet Heckman and Millard Rice, yes, those 3 are Clewells, yes, but Vernon is not.
You don't think it? Okay, I looked up in Joanne very nicely gave me her history #1, and there are a couple Messingers in there, but I can't follow his family enough. I'm just the blind one. Anyway, so 3 out of 4 is not bad. Richard, do you want to tell the significance of the second lady from the right?
This lady here, she's my mother.
And Joanne's mother.
Yep, that's our mother. And if I can point out one other thing that I think is absolutely fascinating about this is Millard, all the way to the far right, has a very, very small trumpet sounding trombone. And if you go all the way to the far left, Vernon Messinger has what's referred to as a bass trombone. And you can't see it there, but there's actually a crank, a handle that he will hold in his right hand, because he has to extend the slide so far out. He just can't hold it with his ordinary hand, but there's a handle that extends that slide. So you have a soprano, alto, tenor, and bass trombone, which is really remarkable.
Mm-hmm. Pretty much for a while in colonial America, the only sets of 4 trombones, most people don't know that there is a set of trombones. The ones that kids play now is mostly tenor. But mostly the sets were in Moravian churches, and Schoeneck had one of those. And okay, let's see. Can you unmute people for a little bit? Do you have any questions about what I have said so far?
I'm looking. Yep. Let me.
Am I unmuted? Because I have a question about the slide. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
The slide of the 2 churches with the stone church, I was reading underneath it, and I think I understood it right, but I just wanted to make sure yes. So the church that I'm seeing on the left is the stone church that replaced the log cabin, right? Or am I wrong?
No, the building that replaced the log cabin was a stone building, but it was used for a school, and it's this one. And when they built the stone church, which is this part, they connected them. So they're kind of together, but the church part was here. And then 30 years later, they built this part. This part still stands. This is now the parsonage. And they took down this stone part to build the brick church that we have now.
So is the wording underneath it correct? I'm just a little confused.
This is a confusing topic. I always have to draw it out. Yeah, okay. The 1826 stone parsonage is this on the left. And the church is read what I do I need to mirror my image?
I don't know, but can you say that
You'll-
again? Because
you'll-
you faded out.
Yeah. Can you read what's here? If you haven't
Yeah,
been able
you're
to read
okay.
what
Yeah,
I
it's okay.
what I need. Okay.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
okay.
So the stone church is on the right. That's this, and this no longer exists. But the parsonage is this one, and that still exists. And well, it wasn't built as the parsonage; it was built as a school. But this still exists.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Any other questions?
I'm curious as to whether at the Moravian Church you still have trombones playing.
We do. Some congregations have moved to what they call a brass choir. Generally, when we have brass play, which is maybe once a month, it's more than trombones because we need the trumpets and the other horns. Bethlehem still has an only trombone choir. I think Lidditz still has an only trombone choir. There are still a couple of congregations that still only use trombones, but when Schoeneck has brass, they have other brass.
So what is the significance
Some
of,
churches, you bring whatever instrument you've got.
so what is the significance to the Moravians for music? Because music really plays in there, but what is the basis for that?
It's just that music has always been a big part of Moravian worship in Europe, that a trombone is a good instrument to support singing. So they've just always used brass or used trombones in worship. There isn't really a theological meaning as far as I can remember. They've just always done it. But a lot of churches, they use an organ or a piano and they don't use too much other instrumentation. So it just makes it a little different. Yeah.
So would you say that this was a part of the European tradition that the Moravians brought with them when they came to the colonies?
Yes.
Because I would suspect that was a part of the European tradition that they were just very strongly influenced with, and they just brought it with them, and it just became a tradition of the Moravians of today as well. I mean, with the Moravian Music Festival and things like that. So it's a very strong, music is a very strong influence in the Moravian Church.
Yeah, that's right. And in Schoeneck, we still use a lot of other instruments, mostly depending on what, if once a kid starts learning to play as a student, the organist usually tries to find them some music that they can play just to help their musicality, but also because it adds something to the worship. So, we had somebody studying oboe, clarinet, what does he play now? Saxophone. So whatever the kids are playing, we try to give them an opportunity to play also. Other questions?
Sue, can you take off your, what do you call it?
Stop sharing.
Yeah,
Stop sharing.
Okay, I do have, yeah, before I do that, there are
Sure.
a couple of questions that I wrote down from last week. So let me do those and then I will stop sharing.
sure.
If that's okay. Okay. Let's see. The man who asked this last week is not here today, I don't think, unless he came on. But he had asked, oh, was that you, Sharon, who asked
Yeah,
that?
I asked.
Okay.
I was doing.
Were the Clewells Huguenot or Moravian? It depends on when you're talking about. In Europe, they were Huguenots. They were French Protestants in the 16th and 17th centuries. A lot of them had to leave France, including the Clewells. The Clewells apparently went to a German-speaking area, and if you know European history, including up until the present, the borders between countries are pretty flexible. They just keep moving back and forth. And so sometimes the country that you are living in and the official language of that country is not the language that is spoken in your village or in your area. So I think this may have happened to the Clewells because it moved back and forth a couple times. Mostly when the Huguenots came here, except for a couple of places in upstate New York, most of them were assimilated into other groups. And so a lot that the ones who went to Ole, obviously, sort of were assimilated into German-speaking Protestants.
The
Another question from last week. I didn't catch that, Sharon.
South Carolina, and I believe it's Charleston. I don't want to mix up Charleston and Savannah, but I think it was Charleston. There is a Huguenot church, which I visited. Not when there was a service, but it was open for the public to see, but it was still an active church.
Let's see, I lost you.
There was a Huguenot church in Charleston, South Carolina that I visited. Not
Oh,
during-
interesting.
It wasn't during a service, it was open for the public. But it was, from what I recall, now this is maybe 20 years ago, but they had, they had information there, which I picked up about the Huguenots, and apparently they were having an active church services, which I found very interesting because I didn't realize that they were still worshiping. And there is a Huguenot society, which I tried to join until they wanted to have all of the information. I had to go all the way back. The book, the Clewell history book, was not acceptable. I had to actually have birth certificates and everything. And I just didn't get it. I'm not going to do that. But there is a Huguenot society that exists.
Yeah, I remember hearing them talk about the society at one of the Clewell reunions that I was at. Wow, I didn't realize that they were that strict about who could join.
Well, they were very welcoming to me, but they wanted to have proof, other than what I had in hardbound book. That wasn't good enough. So
interesting. That's too bad.
Yeah.
Okay. There was another question from last week. Was Louisa ever accepted into Moravian membership? She was. Page 26 of the first Clewell history gives the dates and the time and the first time that she took communion. There were a number of months between when she was accepted and when she took communion. In the early years, just because the preaching was not able to be there every week. There probably was a large gap of time between when she was received and when they had communion. So that doesn't necessarily indicate anything. According to the Clewell book, her response to being received and taking communion is recorded in French, which is written as though someone who knows more about German high school. Her gravestone, however, is written in German. So I was thinking that the French had sort of gone away long before the people came here, but I guess she was old enough that she still remembered a little French. Another question from last week, the background of the name Schoeneck, or if you're German, Schoeneck. That was one of the Zinzendorf family's ancestral lands in Austria. And so when they came to this country, they named a couple of places here after some of those ancestral lands. If you remember the name, if you've heard the name Wachovia, it used to be a bank. But that was the name of the Moravian lands in North Carolina. And then some people there started a bank, and then it got swallowed up by a couple of other banks. And I think and this is something that you will need to understand as you're trying to do the genealogy. Why couldn't they just come to church in Nazareth? And that's because Nazareth was founded by the Moravians as a closed community. You had to be Moravian in order to live here. For a while, they lived communally as a group. There were separate houses for children, for single women, for single men. Married couples did not always have their own room. In the early years, they lived together in the same building or maybe in a different building. But didn't always have their own house or their own room. The church owned all the land, determined who could live here, what business you could do. It was operated by the church. This system ended, it started loosening up in the early 1800s, but the system ended in 1856. So Schoeneck was considered a preaching place. So that was what we think of as a church now. People lived in their own houses, they had their own land, or they rented land, and they just came together for worship. So each family was in Schoeneck economically autonomous. So they did, once the Schoeneck congregation had been, my connection is unstable. Once the congregation had been founded, they were able to come into church at Nazareth for like Christmas Eve or some of the special services. But they still worshiped in their own separate place. And I think that's all of the questions that I had from last week. Let me give you one more. If you're wanting to know more about this, there's a book. And if you talk to Richard or Joanne, they can probably get it for you. So let me stop the share. All right.
Any more questions that you have for Sue? Don't everybody. Go ahead.
Well, I have a question.
Richard.
I have a question. I'd like another look at that book. I didn't get to get anything down on it.
Oh, okay. Let's see.
All right.
While I'm doing that, I think Sharon had a question too.
Yeah, well, it's not really a question, it's a comment and a thank you. Because I'm born and raised and still living a Lutheran. And I wondered how on earth I got to be a Lutheran when some of my cousins were Moravians and whatever. And you answered that question for me today when you said George was a Lutheran and I'm descendant from George. So that kind of explains how I ended up being a Lutheran.
Much of it is also geographic. The Moravian Church is very small, especially compared to the Lutherans. And so a lot of it depends where you live. If you move to a place where there is a Moravian Church, that's fine. If you move to a place that has no Moravian Church, which a lot of Moravians do, then they look around and, you know, become Lutheran or Presbyterian or Methodist or whatever, you know, whatever congregation they can worship where they're living. So if your line obviously didn't maintain its Lutheranness for the whole time since George, but you may have had a proclivity to it because of that.
Sue, didn't George also take communion and become a member? I believe that's in
yeah.
in the histories too. So it wasn't a straight shot from George.
Okay.
I think you're right that you know, as people started to get away from that area and make homes out of that side of the area, they would go to the church that was in their area that they felt comfortable attending services at.
I think it's interesting that I became Lutheran with none of my immediate family having been Lutheran, but I was drawn to it. It must have been my ancestors, don't you think?
Well, we have Moravians in my current Lutheran church. They were Moravians and now they're Lutherans.
Oh.
So it's interesting. A lot of it is similar if you read some of the
Conrad or
material.
John.
And we've been
Joanne.
Californians. We've been Californians for many
Anything that
generations.
you would like to add? Still,
I wanted to say we've been Californians for many generations since the middle 1800s. And yet my grandson, from all these Californians, he is now living in Pennsylvania, not far from you guys. That's ancestral influence too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Conrad or John, did you want to add something? Sue was asking about that.
No, just a lot of little incidentals that we really don't have time to cover. But I played in the brass for over 50 years, it was interesting that she's absolutely right. It came from Germany. Matter of fact, the first instruments that were here were shipped from Germany. Later, they made them in Bethlehem as well. But they also used the brass choir. There was a question about why we used the brass. They actually celebrated from the bell tower at special occasions like funerals and Easter mornings, and all that was celebrated by the trombone choir. And there were set tunes that we still have in our books that celebrate, you know, individual people like single sisters, blah, blah, blah. And there's tunes for each one of them. So when the brass would play from the bell tower, the people would know who passed away in the community. And that was a carryover from Germany. And we continued it here in the early years. Matter of fact, way back, I remember climbing the bell tower when we could still get up there and play for a few selected funerals. So just another little tidbit.
No, that's excellent. That's excellent. I have a map here just as a point of reference. Here's let me back out a little bit. Here's Philadelphia down here where our ancestors landed. And here's Reading, Pennsylvania. And if I open it up here or narrow in, right here is Ole. That gives you some kind of an idea. It's roughly 55 miles from Philadelphia over here to Reading. And like you know, they've settled here for a few years. And then they move up here to Nazareth. And of course, they settle just a little north of Nazareth. And it's about 45 miles from Ole up here to Nazareth. So just wanted to give you a little bit of a perspective. Ole is not here, but it's right here where my cursor is. And then of course up here is Nazareth. So that gives you some kind of an idea. I wanted to share. Does anybody know what this book is? Anybody want to take a guess?
Register.
I
register.
know
And what is it?
it's the registry, the church registry,
In fact, it's
but I'm not sure if it's the first one or the second one.
It is the first one. But this, and I have a better picture here. Well, another picture just to give you an idea of the size. There's a regular, about a 6-inch pencil. So it's not a very big book, but this is where, and Sue, do you want to explain that term, that Lebenslauf? Sue, are you still there?
We may have lost you.
Oh.
I don't see her appearing anymore.
I'm back. Yeah, I disappeared. My internet is not cooperating. Lebenslauf was something that was encouraged by the Moravian Church. It was writing your autobiography, but paying attention to the spiritual. So, if you're lucky now, what you want to know is where they were born, when they were born, brothers and sisters, that type of thing. The Lebenslauf, they also wanted you to highlight your spiritual. And that would have been included in a lot of cases in the church's diary, which is probably a different book than this, although in the early years, they probably didn't have that many books, so some of them might have been in here. You were supposed to write it, and then when you died, somebody in your family finished it, or usually the pastor finished it, and then it would be read at your funeral.
Okay. Would you say that would be like the equivalent of a lot of evangelical Christians who would say that they give their testimony? This is how I came to Christ, and this is my spiritual path in life. And is that kind of more of what that would be, the Lebenslauf?
Yeah, testimonies are not usually your whole life. It's more really focusing on the moment that your conversion, became saved or whatever.
Right.
So it's kind of like that, but hopefully in there.
Hello, Sue? Sue, did we lose you?
No, I know you froze, so I didn't hear what you said.
Oh, okay. I was just trying to get back in touch with you because things dropped off. But so it's not quite like a conversion testimony, like a someone might give. It's more of the extended life of what they did, and that sort of thing. Okay.
Right.
Does anybody know what this book is?
Oh, yes, church book.
It's a church
In
book?
German, church book is a Kirchenbuch, is church book, the book.
Who's the Gemeinde?
Unity.
The community or the fellowship, right?
Right, yeah,
And there's the word of Schoeneck.
yeah.
Oh, Gemeinde?
Correct. And there's the dates written on it. This is the second of the church registers at that are contained in the Moravian archives. And here's the picture giving a little bit more perspective. Let me just share this. This is what's in the front of these two volumes, and I bring this to everybody's attention. This register was restored with a generous funding from the Clewell Family Association in the year 2007. So I want everybody to know, probably, what is it, 15 years ago, we raised money to restore both of those two registers. I know Paul Puker, the archivist, was thrilled that we donated the money for that. And he was very happy with the job that the company that did that put together. And one more, I was just at the archives about 3 weeks ago. Now, I'm going to let this settle in here and get this a little bit bigger. Can anybody read a little bit about what's going on here in the front at the beginning?
Something going on in Geneva, Switzerland. Louise went there in 1695.
Is that you, Gwen?
Yes.
Yep. This has something to do with the life of Louisa Kuklein,
Be born,
right?
from
In 1695,
1695.
in December,
Geneva.
in Geneva.
born in
Exactly.
Geneva.
I can't read any more, but I will show this. Where did it go? Oh. Here's a date. Is this familiar to anybody? 1763, 23rd of January. This is a test because Sue just went through this. This is what-
Isn't that her date of birth, date of death?
No,
No?
that's when she
When she
received
joined the
communion.
Oh, yes.
Going to church.
And Francis and George's names are here. I'm sorry, here's Franz, and here's Georg Clewell. And this is on page 300 in the very first church register. Now, just exactly what all this information is, I guess it's biographical of Louisa. But I just thought I'd share that with you.
This is probably her Lebenslauf.
That's what I'm guessing it is. Yeah.